seated. You know, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful to see all of you. My name is Gail Shanks, and I am the founder and co-owner of Changing Hands. And I see so many familiar faces, even behind the masks, and I'm so thrilled. Most of you know that we have a lot of events at our store and have over the years. We have literary events, we have events for kids, we have public forums, we have, when council is running for council, we have a lot of members that come and we do a forum here. And we're always looking at issues that are facing our community, literacy issues, school funding, all of those things that are near and dear to our hearts, both as booksellers and as residents and human beings. So I personally became involved with this Tempe First group that is sponsoring this forum today. It was a newly created organization, and we thought we were going to be looking at issues about the unhoused, school funding, how council members get elected and if there might be a better way, how city budgets get allocated, and how we as residents could have a voice in what goes on in our city. The organization is all volunteer. It's a group of Tempe residents, small business owners like myself, teachers, former and current elected officials, neighborhood associations, retirees, veterans, people working for the homeless and mental health issues, students, healthcare workers, and others interested in preserving the best of what we love about our city. This forum today kind of evolved from one of those issues. There is a parcel of land on the Rio Salado Parkway and Priest that currently houses our solid waste, transportation, and engineering divisions for the city. 150 people work there. It's valuable land, could be used for many purposes beyond the proposed arena and entertainment district, but our city council chose to put out an RFP basically designed for the Coyotes. There have been few public events to consider this issue. The Coyotes have held sway over the council's few public meetings and have had several pep rallies to try to convince the public that they are building this arena on their own dime. This forum will bring you arguments on the other side. We're asking the question today, should the last remaining large parcel of land be turned over to a developer who has a less than stellar financial background, has not lived up to his contractual obligations in the past, has asked for and would receive huge tax abatements, would use Tempe city taxes to pay off private debt, and in addition, would undermine the quality of life for all of us who live here. We are talking about increased traffic, on-site gambling, and welcoming into our community out-of-state big box stores and hotels, the only entities that possibly might be able to sustain an excess excise tax on their products and services. No local business owner that I know of would take that risk, including Changing Hands for sure. The members of this panel today will share their thoughts about this development. We are hopeful, when given the facts about this proposed development, that you will agree with us that we should not change the general plan, not rezone the area to accommodate an arena, luxury housing, and an entertainment district, and not have our mayor sign a contract with Alex Morello's development team. We ask you to vote no on 3 propositions, now known as Prop 301, 302, and 303, when you receive a mail-in ballot after April 19th, or go to the polls on May 16th for this special election. Our format today begins with our panelists who are sitting behind me. We will take questions and comments at the end of the final presentation because we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk. I do understand that there are always two sides to every situation. Some of you may have opinions that differ from the presenters. I would ask you to please be civil and respectful and not interrupt the speakers. I will be moderating the conversation and am hopeful that we can have a useful, civil discussion with all voices heard. So no worries about not having a chance to ask a question or state your opinion, but we're gonna do that at the end. Our first speaker is Dawn Pennant Thacker. She is a longtime resident and a small business owner here in Tempe. She served on the Tempe Library Board, the Tempe Citizens Review Board, and the Tempe Industrial Development Authority. She's the co-founder of Save Our Schools Arizona, something near and dear to my heart, a Tempe-based nonprofit dedicated to improving public school funding, and she will be talking about the finances of these proposals today. Dawn?
Okay, I'm also a teacher, so I'll try to use my teacher voice if this is a little low. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so why do we keep hearing that this development is privately funded? Where do they even get that from? Well, because they're playing a shell game that is built into these proposals. Let me explain. Government property lease excise tax, GIPLET. GIPLETs are a tool to hide property from the tax rolls and unfairly shift the tax burden onto existing residents and businesses. A shell game designed to hide politically preferred property from the tax rolls. GIPLETs gut local tax revenues and leave taxpayers statewide to backfill the difference in school, hospital, transportation, and all the other segments of a county and municipal budget. The game works like this. The developer, in this case Alex Morello, conveys land to a city. The city declares it blighted, and that's why you're hearing this line of landfill to landmark. You heard Gail explain what's really there. It's not quite a landfill, but part of the GIPLET scheme is to consider the land blighted and low value and to say who else would want this. Then the city leases it back to the developer. Voila, the land is now government property exempt from property taxes. In theory though, the developer should owe the excise tax for leasing government property. But that's where the GIPLET comes in to save the day for the developer by having taxpayers pay his bills. In the propositions that we'll see in April through May, the proposal gives Morello not one, but two massive tax breaks, which is unprecedented for Tempe. One for 8 years, and the other for an unprecedented 30 years. Again, GIPLET abatements leave gaping holes in all the other residential and community programs that we residents use. Road maintenance, veteran services, pre-K, Care 7, art programming, parks and lakes, police and fire, all of which rely on property tax revenue to function, property tax revenue that is not being paid for 30 years, plus 8 years, plus the other giveaways and undervalued portions of this proposal. This is what Goldwater Institute economists here in Arizona have called, quote, a sort of crony corporate welfare that starts a race to the bottom to see which government can give away the most taxpayer dollars. That's a Goldwater quote. To quote Councilwoman Garland when she spoke to Wrangler News last summer, quote, "People who use the arena or events on that property will be driving on our streets with our police officers directing traffic and using city infrastructure and resources. And we're giving out those services without taking any money back in," Garland said. With the tax abatement, this is still her quote, "With the tax abatement, we'd end up not putting money into our general fund to go back into paying for these things. That affects all of our residents, including South Tempe. I have a 4-month-old grandson," she said. "He'd be 30 when the tax abatement ends. If we're putting out money and the city is not getting money back in, something else will have to give in the city budget." That's the end of Councilwoman Garland's quote. But that's not all. We are also going to be asked to uphold the Community Facilities District, the CFD portion of the proposal, which gives, this is my personal favorite, which gives taxing authority to a private entity to create and impose new taxes. In this case, one to pay for development of the land, internal roadways, sidewalks, lighting, landscaping, and much more. None of this new tax, none of the CFD and developer surcharge go back to the city. 100% is retained by the developer. This gives the developer authority to impose private taxation so that in order to actually use or rent in this facility, in these luxury retail boutiques and luxury residences, Tempe residents will be paying over and above all existing state and city taxes, but we as a community will get none of that taxing revenue. What we will get, as Gail mentioned, is more big box retailers, corporate chains, because what small business, what mom and pop shop will be able to open, and what residents will be able to live there. We've seen it all before. This will create a domino effect of encouraging other landlords to raise their rents as well. Tempe's business and affordable housing environment will be dramatically impacted, with mom and pop shops, small businesses, and their staff and customers being the hardest hit. Meanwhile, the development is adding unprecedented increased demand on police and fire, roadways and traffic, and other resident services already stretched thin. And there are some, I'll say little sprinkles in the proposal meant to, I think, assuage our concerns here, such as $200,000 to cover increased demand on police. $200,000 isn't even 2 police officers for 46 acres of new development. One final interesting note, if anyone saw this news on Friday, Tempe has already been sued more than once for misuse of tax giveaways and property tax schemes favoring developers. On Friday, just a few days ago, an Arizona Court of Appeals ruled that Tempe City Council was wrong in okaying a different GIPLET, aka taxpayer-funded, $1.8 billion luxury development and retail development without getting voter approval. The developer in that instance has said that they will appeal this ruling to the Arizona Supreme Court, so we'll have to watch how long that takes and what happens with it. But this is a chronic and growing problem that we can look around and see the results of throughout our community. So we may very well see yet another special election asking we the voters if we approve of these taxpayer-funded developments. Thank you so much.
That was a lot to take in, but you haven't heard anything yet. Our next speaker is Richard Newhouser, who is currently a professor of English in the English department at ASU. He's a member of United Campus Workers of Arizona and treasurer of the Democrats of LD8. Richard is going to be talking about the background of the development group and billionaire Alex Morello in particular. Richard?
Thank you. I'm also a teacher, and I can say for once, this microphone is at the perfect height. So after you have all now understood all the facts about the costs to Tempe taxpayers that the plans for a luxury entertainment district will amount to, you are no doubt asking yourselves why anyone would believe in such a scheme. Sure, it's complicated and requires someone like Dawn to unpack it all, but there are also, aren't there, supposedly promises of huge returns made by the Coyotes organization to deflect from the actual cost to us taxpayers? Do these promises come from a businessman we can believe? According to numerous accounts in reputable news outlets, the answer is no. Not paying bills, waiting months or years to fulfill financial obligations, and then only when forced to do so, as a wide range of news reports have said, which you're looking at some of them, the headlines at any rate on the slide. These are apparently habitual failures by Alex Morello, who owns the majority share of the Coyotes. Now, the case in Glendale at the Gila River Arena is widely known, and probably many of you know this already, but let me point to just a few of the glaring danger signs that might warn anyone not to do business with the Coyotes owner. As was reported in USA Today at the end of 2021, the city of Glendale had to threaten to lock the Coyotes organization out of the arena unless it paid $1.3 million in city and state taxes that had been owed for months. The city taxes, which amounted to $250,000, were apparently owed for over a year at that point. And pay attention, you're going to hear that figure of an unpaid $250,000 again. But, you know, if you're a billionaire, $250,000 here, $250,000 there, who cares? As was reported by The Athletic, a sports news outlet which is part of the New York Times, even while the Coyotes were not paying their bills in Glendale, the Roadrunners, the Coyotes farm team, had to be put on a payment plan in Tucson to settle outstanding debts in that city. The Roadrunners owed back rent for the 2020-2021 season of, and this is going to be a shocker, $250,000. Not just cities in Arizona or the state of Arizona itself have had to take drastic steps to be paid by the Morello organization, according to news reports, but also the employees of vendors providing services for the Coyotes, such as those who worked at the Gila River Arena. Many sports venues had to close in 2020 because of the pandemic, but the sports teams with activities at those venues helped the employees working there by continuing to pay for them, or at least most of the sports teams. Yet, as Arizona Central reported in 2020, though the Coyotes organization claimed to have given funds to pay workers at the arena in Glendale, and however, their claim arrived 2 months after the date on which they had promised to make the payments, the employees at the arena still had not been paid by May of 2020. And on the other hand, as noted in that same AZ Central report, the other sports teams in Arizona said they would continue to pay those affected by the pandemic. And the Gila River Arena employees were not the only ones for whom being paid was apparently the last thing on Alex Meruello's mind. The sports news outlet, The Last Word on Sports, asked in February of last year why the Coyotes organization does not, quote, pay Paradigm Ventures Southwest, who was the team's private airline charter, close quote, question mark. Does anyone here want to guess how much money the team owed the airlines? Give that woman a free yard sign. Now, she's already got one,
Yeah,
but
thank you very much.
that's right, $257,000 plus taxes. So there's many other news reports of this kind that document allegations of missing payments and threats of lawsuits, such as at the Meruello Group's hotels in Las Vegas and Reno. We all know that business deals of any kind depend on trust. Trust that business partners are who they say they are. Trust that a business deal is backed up by the collateral that has been promised. Trust that the promises of huge returns will really materialize. And from all the reports in reputable news outlets that have exposed the weaknesses of the Coyotes organization and that of the team's owner, it seems possible to assert that Alex Meruello does not deserve the trust of Tempe's taxpayers. That's why we're urging you to vote no on 301, 302, and 303. Thanks.
Boy, I'm getting more and more depressed as we go along here. I don't know about the rest of you. Our next speaker is Marie Provine. She's Professor Emeritus in Justice Studies in the School of Social Transformation at ASU. She's a political scientist and lawyer, and is going to talk about her concerns about the gambling operations that involve the Coyotes and the arena. Marie?
Thank you, Thea. First of all, thank you, all of you, for coming today. It's really great to see this much interest from Tempe in what can happen if we're not paying attention, which is kind of the problem we're talking about today. I'm going to talk about another financial drain in our community besides those that have been covered in terms of the direct building of this project. My starting point is that we should not be talking so much about hockey and stadiums, but be talking about sports betting, because this is a very big part of this operation, and it's very much part of why this proposal was made for Tempe. And we should be thinking about the impact of vastly increased sports betting on our community. Alex Meruello he intends to make big money here from this. He wants to open 2 physical sports betting operations here in Tempe, probably conveniently located within walking distance of the ASU campus. This is where he's made his money, and it's his real business. I didn't know so much about sports betting before I started looking into this. It turns out that sports betting is really huge. It's bigger than casino gambling, which I always thought was the very biggest thing of all. People who bet on lotteries, that's even a little larger, but sports betting is right up there, and it's getting easier. You know, you can do it online. It's very appealing, especially to young people who are better with their phones than old people. And this is a problem, because in Tempe, this is a young people's town. Well, let me just give you a little bit of data on sports betting that I've learned. The real issue isn't the people who don't have a problem with sports betting, it's the people who do, and that's a lot of people. Compulsive gambling and even violence are at least twice as high among gamblers as non-gamblers. One study of online sports bettors revealed that 16% met clinical criteria for a gambling disorder, and 13% showed signs of gambling problems. Now, that's bad, but students, especially male students, I hate to say, 18 to 24, prime age for being in the highest risk category. And you know, we don't have to ask ourselves too many questions about why that particular age group might be more vulnerable. We've seen it in other contexts. There is a higher rate, perhaps double, among younger people as gamblers compared to older people. And several studies estimate that 4 to 8% of adolescents develop serious problems like compulsive gambling, and another 10 to 15% are at risk. These are studies, not personal experience. Thankfully, my kids are not really into this. The rate of gambling addiction among students is increasing, probably because it's getting easier and easier with apps, and it's a popular thing to do. Now, I'm going to kind of turn to something that you may already know, but I speak to you as a ASU University professor like Richard's here. We have over 55,000 students on the Tempe campus. It's been a record year, and if you believe Michael Crow, it's going to keep growing. It's not going to get smaller. My favorite building where I spent my time at ASU, Wilson Hall, is no longer. Wilson Hall is rubble, and a dormitory is going into its place. Tempe itself only has 184,000 people, so we're really talking about a huge population. Economically, ASU is a big deal too. It has more than 26,000 jobs, 642 acres, and 1.6 billion in total labor income, with 2.2 billion in terms of what it contributes to the gross city product. Now, Alex Meruello is no fool. He knows that this is a dream location for an operation that's going to involve a lot of betting. And we need to know that he has launched Sahara Bets, which is a digital, surprise, betting platform he owns. He also, of course, owns the Coyotes. He's only the second owner of a team who's also into sports betting. That's really a dangerous combination on a lot of fronts. So what is his spokesperson? This is Andrew Patterson, one of his people. I think he's the CEO of Sahara Bets. Here's what he says. As the sports betting landscape continues to evolve in the Valley, Sahara Bets looks forward to collaborating with the Coyotes organization to engage and interact with sports fans and fun in unique ways. That scares me as much as some of these others. Now, I'm tasked with saying, what can you do? And I know a lot of you already know what you can do. Obviously, number one is to vote. Ballots are going to be mailed on April 19th, the election. You have to do it on May 16th if you haven't earlier. You can canvass. I think especially talking to people who know you and who respect your concerns is really, really valuable. You can host a neighborhood session. So bring a few friends, a dozen or so if you can. You could do it on Zoom, we could do it in person, and we can bring some of us along and this wonderful slideshow to help us out. Social media is another possibility. Just talking about it, and of course, yard signs. We're really pleased with our yard signs. We do need donations for that, and Lauren Kuby, who's our next speaker, will be giving us some details on that. So thank you very much.
You've heard all the problems, or thought you had heard all the problems with this development. Marie just jumped the gun a teeny little bit by telling you what the next step is you can take. But before we do that, I'd like Lauren to just talk to you and David a little bit about two more issues that are facing us if this arena should go into its construction phase. Lauren was our former council member and vice mayor, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about traffic and quality of life considerations, which are, enormous. And you wouldn't be here today if you weren't concerned about the quality of life for yourself and your family here in Tempe. So Lauren, can you just share some things with us?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So good to see you. Just let me
morning, friends and former constituents, and the Honorable Barbara Sherman. So glad that you're here. Thank you. Just a little personal note. This has been going on in the City Council in discussion for over 3 years, and I had the chance to meet Mr. Murillo. I arrived at the meeting on my bike, you know, foldable bike, and I was dressed professionally, but it was unusual maybe that he was witnessing me packing up my bike, and he looked at me and said, "Councilmember QB, I bet you've never met with a billionaire before." So I had the perfect response. I said, "Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg, do they count?" They're billionaires on paper. Anyway, so I wanted to talk to you about some of the other issues, and one is traffic. And we've raised many objections to the proposed project today, but we'd be remiss in not mentioning traffic concerns. This site is at the northeast corner of Rio Salado and Priest. So the Rio Salado Priest intersection is very congested, and it's the entryway to the airport for many of us. And Rio Salado Parkway is notorious. It's already one of Tempe's most trafficked areas, especially at rush hour. And although the Coyotes are contributing funds to mitigate traffic problems at Priest and 143, we have to say, you know, the city insisted on that. It's a minuscule amount. It's for the airport entrance, so this mitigation does little to stop overflow into our neighborhoods south and east of the proposed area. The city says, and by the way, the first traffic study the city presented was the day it was approved, so there was very little time for neighborhoods to really see that traffic study, as Phil Yates, chair of the Riverside Neighborhood Association, will tell you. But the city said at that meeting that they'll respond to traffic problems as they arise, as they always have. No comment. The nearby Sunset and Riverside neighborhoods are plagued with cut-through traffic that will only worsen with the addition of a sports venue, 2,000 multifamily units, so that's probably 4,000 new people. And you know, many residents in South Tempe are avoiding the downtown entirely because of traffic concerns. So can you imagine how bad it's going to get? We know how bad it gets at Sun Devil Stadium on game days. Imagine the impact of those new residents, of 40 games a year, all in a very congested area. And not to even mention the disruption that we're going to see from 10 to 12 years, the expected duration of the build out of this project. So, something to think about. And then talk about quality of life, because some people argue and have argued, you know, people don't like it, they don't have to visit there, they don't have to, you know, spend money there, they can just stay away. But this is the last bulk of our city-owned land, and residents should not be faced with a love it or leave it threat. This should be land that's developed in a way that aligns with our values and that can offer something to every resident. So to have Tempe's name on the ice, which is touted as a, you know, multi-million-dollar benefit, it does nothing to address our community priorities. And if we vote to approve this 30-year partnership, we will be changing Tempe's culture. Make no mistake about it. We'll be gambling on a developer that is known to be a very big donor to legislators. He tried to get the gaming law changed to his advantage for the Mullet Stadium and spent $113,000 with legislators in order to convince them to change the gambling pact already. So you can imagine this casino operator is going to play a big role in Tempe politics. It's going to play a big role in how we elect our council members who represents us. It is going to be a dominating feature of our landscape, both cultural and political, and I really worry about that impact. Now, I added something. I want to surprise my fellow panelists, but I was reading last night sports economist J.C. Bradbury. He's writing for Global Sports Matters at ASU. We have a Global Sports Institute now at ASU. And he quoted from University of Chicago economist Alan Sanderson, who once said, if you want to inject money into the local economy, it'd be better to drop it from a helicopter than invest in a new stadium. It's a good line, and one to remember that next time your city is asked to help pay for a sports stadium, he said. So what J.C. Bradbury, and he's a sports economist, and the thing that I pleaded with my fellow colleagues on the council is say, before we do anything, we must hire a forensic economist to look at Mr. Murillo. We must do this. It's a dereliction duty if we don't, and a forensic economist was never contracted with. So J.C. Bradbury is an economist, he's a sports economist. He wrote, the reality is that stadiums are not likely to have strong economic impacts, and as such are not good candidates for public subsidy. While underwriting a large local project promising to generate jobs and spread wealth throughout the community may seem sensible on its face, The supporting evidence for return on investment is dismal. Politicians and voters alike should keep that in mind. It's fine and fun to enjoy a game in the stands of a new stadium, a new arena as a paying customer, but there's no reason to pretend that doing so is making anybody else richer, other than the team's owner, who is likely already a billionaire.
Oh, that was a surprise, but it is not a surprise. I mean, we have been reading about that kind of financial economic issue now for over a year. And as Lauren said, we have begged the council endless times to hire a forensic economist to look at it. And what did they do? They hired Beacon Sports. Beacon Sports is an organization that puts bankers together with sports teams and with cities to build arenas. That's their job. And when they look at the financials, they say, oh, perfect, perfect. No worries about Dun & Bradstreet, no worries about credit. This is the perfect match for Tempe. Unfortunately, we did not hear that from someone who was unbiased. So, Lauren, that was great sleuthing. But again, I hate to keep saying the word depressing, but we're going to move on from that because look at how many of you are here thinking about this now. Our last speaker today is David Dwaron. I got it right. Okay. Who lives in central Tempe. He's a former military and commercial pilot and currently chairs the Tempe Aviation Commission. He's going to tell you a little bit about those airplanes that fly in the flight path underneath, or excuse me,
You're underneath.
we will be underneath their flight path. So David, thank you for coming today.
This microphone is exactly the right height. Well, I don't know as much about finances as all these other experts, but I do have a little familiarity with aviation. I flew for 40 years, 12 years in the Air Force and 28 years with the airlines. And back in those old days, back in the olden times, we used to have documents like these. And I show you this because you'll notice the page on the left is green and the page on the right is white. The distinction is the white page is federal. It's the FAA that publishes that. The green page is municipal. It's published by the City of Phoenix. The City of Phoenix has a noise abatement procedure in effect that we call the IGA. It only affects departures towards the east. It has nothing to do with traffic going the other direction. So arrivals coming into Tempe are not affected. They can fly any way they want, and it's not part of our deal. And the arrivals coming in from the west side are not affected by the IGA. IGA only specifies departures going to the east. And this is the documents. Now they're on computers, but this is the documents that implement that. It is based on an agreement that Tempe made with Phoenix. Once again, the source is Phoenix, remember that. An agreement with Phoenix that we would not increase the housing in the 65 dBA zone. And putting in the stadium and putting in that housing is perceived by the City of Phoenix as violating the IGA. Tempe can jump up and down and holler, it doesn't. But if Phoenix thinks it is, it is. It's that simple. And if that happens, if that determination is made by the City of Phoenix, then there will be one big major change that takes place with departures to the east. Right now, traffic is single file. No matter what runway they take off on, they all follow each other nose to tail going out. And the RAPCON people, the airline pilots, the owners of the airlines and the City of Phoenix would like to double that. They would like to have 2 lanes of traffic going east instead of just 1. So at the point that they actually start digging for this development, or they approve it, whatever point the City of Phoenix declares that voids the IGA, then you will see the amount of flights over the City of Tempe eastbound double. The same number of airplanes, but more of them will be going over Tempe instead of over the river. And in addition to not being over the river, they can fly over South Tempe over North Tempe. They can get off the runway until they're about 500 feet and then just make a turn. Right now, they're going almost all the way to Mesa with the agreement. But they can make a turn before the Salt River Bridge and then head out. It make quite a difference. The second thing about this particular development that really gets me, if you look on a map, the stadium proposal, the arena proposal, is right smack dead center on the flight path. Not off to one side, not offset, right dead center. Now, everybody here is familiar with what happened with Sully on the Hudson. An unanticipated accident where the birds flew into the engines of the airplane, lost all power, and it had to go someplace. And it was a glider. It was a great big aluminum glider. Luckily, they had a river. Now, if that river hadn't been there, that airplane might have gone into a big metropolitan area, but they had a river. Well, it was also one other piece of luck, and that was it happened after they got to a certain altitude. If it had happened just as they were crossing the East River, they wouldn't have had enough altitude to get to anywhere. They would have crashed in Central Park or on Times Square. So there's things that happen in aviation that you cannot anticipate. Since records have been kept about wind shear in the last 30 years or so, there have been 27 hull loss accidents. A hull loss means the airplane's destroyed. Most of the time it means everybody on board is dead. Now, the safety record of aviation is still better than driving. You will take a bigger risk driving home from here than you do flying in an airplane. But when an airplane has an accident, it's a big sensation. Okay, let me tell you a little secret. There's no fire department in the world who could save people from burning to death if an airplane loaded with jet fuel were to crash into this arena. And people would say, why didn't they see that ahead of time? Why didn't they stop it? Who was the crazy person that approved this? So we ask you, please don't approve it. Vote no on 301, 302, and 303.